Hub. It'll be on the HighByte Intelligence Hub YouTube channel on YouTube, where we've got a lot of additional videos and information. So I'd recommend anyone who's interested in learning more about HighByte, the YouTube channel is a great location to go. We've got videos to teach you how to install the software, to do certain functions in the software, as well as talking about what the Intelligence Hub is and who HighByte is. So great information in there. We'll get started. I want to thank everyone for joining today. This is exciting. We've got today a great group, and we're looking forward to talking to you about the HighByte Intelligence Hub version 2. So this is really focused around our version 2 release, but a lot of the discussion will be around, kind of what brought on version 2 and what's really unique about it. Today, I'll introduce myself. I'm John Harrington. I lead business development. I'm the Chief Business Officer for HighByte. I'm joined by Aron Semle, who is our Chief Technology Officer, and Tori Penrock-Cambra, who is our Chief Marketing Officer, is also going to be monitoring the chat and the question and answer. So if you have any questions or any issues, please send them to her in the chat, or questions, post them in the Q&A, and at the end of this session, we will have time to address questions and answer questions and have discussions with everyone. The agenda for today is we want to give some background. There are some new people here who aren't as familiar with HighByte, who aren't as familiar with Industrial DataOps. So we'll do a little bit of description of what is Industrial DataOps, and then talk about the HighByte Intelligence Hub. But then we'll spend the majority of our time talking about enterprise deployments with the Intelligence Hub, and how you handle data governance and what that really means, and the capabilities that we've added to version 2.0. And actually, the majority of the time will be spent with demos. So Aron's gonna show some demos on all this new functionality and capabilities, how it works, how you interact with it. And then, of course, as I said, we're gonna jump into the question and answer. A little bit of background on HighByte. So HighByte is a software company based in Portland, Maine in the United States. I know that we've got a lot of international people. So Portland, Maine is about 2 hours north of Boston, if you're familiar with the United States. HighByte was really formed around with a mission to provide manufacturers with critical data infrastructure solution required as they adopt Industry 4.0, digital transformation, industrial transformation type of concepts. HighByte is built with a team of people that have extensive knowledge of industrial software, industrial automation, software for manufacturing companies. So we've built our team around that, IoT, and we've also built a global team. So we've got a global team of partners who work with us, as well as a global team of customers. And we consider our customers part of our team, because we learn from them just as they learn from us and utilize our solutions. Now, Industrial DataOps is really about making industrial data accessible at scale, at high resolutions across the enterprise to drive business decisions. So what do I mean by that? Well, industrial data we've been using for many years. We've got our machinery and devices in our factories. We've got OPC servers, smart sensors, SCADA, MES, CMMS, quality management, lab management systems. So we've had a lot of different systems within our factories or around our factories to collect data, to analyze data, and to allow the execution of the factory. But what we're seeing in the last few years is strategic business functions that are looking to use very high resolutions of this data to be able to do things like production optimization across an entire factory, or compliance, or quality, or asset maintenance, or research and inform research and development with more information, with higher information about the manufacturing process, cost accounting, supply chain. So a lot more business functions within the company that have never had access to industrial data are looking to get access to this data. And they bring along with them enterprise systems. Could be your ERP system, could also be cloud or analytics, dashboards, data lakes, custom databases. And the key is, how do we move data smoothly at very high rates across all these different systems, the industrial and the IT systems, and be able to do it so that we can execute on these business functions. Well, HighByte introduced the HighByte Intelligence Hub about a year and a half ago, and we've been constantly improving it since then. And the HighByte Intelligence Hub is the solution for that. It's a data hub. It moves data. We've got connectivity both on the OT side as well as on the IT side. We're able to ingest data and deliver it to the systems that need access to it. But there are a few things that are really unique about the HighByte Intelligence Hub. The first one being models. At the core of the solution is a modeling environment. It allows you to create custom models based on assets, if you're doing predictive asset maintenance, based on processes, if you're doing that process optimization, or based on products, if you're doing things like compliance or quality analytics. So you build up those models, you use the models to standardize and contextualize your information. You use the models to consolidate information from different sources and normalize the data, which makes it much easier to do things like analytics. And then you manage the information flows as the data flows out to the target systems that need access to it. Another key thing that's unique about the Intelligence Hub is that it's designed for the OT team to work with and to assemble this information to deliver it to the different systems that need it. And by being designed for the OT team, we designed it to be able to run on-premise. You can even run it at the edge. It's very lightweight. It's a web browser-based user interface, and it's an application. So it's a codeless interface to interact with all these different APIs. No longer do you need to write Python or C# or Java in order to link all these different APIs and link up the data between different systems. Now we can do it in a system. And by doing that, we have the visibility to see what data is flowing where, and we have the visibility to see how it's being transformed as it flows. And that way, as change happens, and change always does happen, we're able to react to that change, and we're able to make the changes efficiently. Now that's the HighByte Intelligence Hub as a single hub. But as we've been deploying this in customers over the past year and a half, we've seen companies who've wanted to expand the usage of the Intelligence Hub. They want to not just run a single hub, but they need to implement multiple hubs within their deployment architectures. So why would they need to do that? Well, in some cases, they need to do change management. So you need a development server, a test server, and a production. As you're doing development, you want to copy that configuration onto test. You want to test it out and then push it into production. So how do we manage that flow of configuration? You also may have an environment where your network security is really driving a separation of data systems. So you may have a controls network. You may even have multiple controls networks. You have a business network. In between them, you have firewalls and DMZs. And then you've got the internet. And how do we efficiently and securely move data across them with secure protocols and knowing exactly what's flowing and where? Some companies also really like to functionally separate their systems. So it could be based on an area of the factory. It could be based on a line, a work cell, or even a specific use case. They want to deploy a specific system just to solve that use case or to service that work cell. And that way they've got autonomy, so they can turn things off, they can turn things on, they can make adjustments, and they know that it doesn't impact other mission critical systems that can't be impacted and are required. People are starting to experiment with the edge. Now, the edge has been very important when you think about oil and gas and water and wastewater with all these remote architectures, remote systems, and we need to collect data, we need to curate it, we need to buffer it, and then deliver it to the enterprise when connectivity is there. But people are starting to do that even within their factories today, and they're doing it because they're experimenting with edge analytics. Edge analytics, people are deploying an analytic that runs right beside the machine on an industrial PC, but we need to feed the data to that analytic. We need to take the results of the analytic and push it back into the PLC, and we need to be able to manage that delivery of data. And finally, many of our customers live in an enterprise. They've got multiple sites, and how do we really standardize the data? How do we govern the data flowing up to our enterprise clouds? How do we govern the data going to our different analytic systems and make sure that we have consistency there? So these deployment architectures have really driven a series of requirements that we've heard from our customer base. They're around, we need a central portal to manage a multi-hub configuration. We need to be able to compare and synchronize configuration from one hub to the next. We need to be able to manage users. Who has access to what hub? What can they do? What do they have access to and what are their privileges? And we certainly need to be able to, number one, log any changes that are made, as well as provide feedback to the administrators so that they can make adjustments if connections are lost or connections are down. It was those features and capabilities that really drove us to architect and design the HighByte Intelligence Hub version 2.0. So it's really taking it from the single hub environment to an enterprise deployment where you need to perform data governance. The key features of version 2.0 is multi-hub management, users, roles, and certificate management, the ability to create an audit log and look at and back up your project files so you've got baselines to roll back to. We've enhanced our AWS, Amazon Web Services connectivity to add in unique special connectors for Amazon Kinesis data streams and Amazon Kinesis Firehose. Now, we've already had connectivity to AWS for a while now, in fact, from the beginning of the product, and we're able to do that through our connectivity of our MQTT connectivity to Greengrass and to IoT Core, as well as a few releases back, we added connectivity to IoT Sitewise. But this Kinesis really expands the volume of data and the efficiency of moving data into AWS. And the final feature that's part of version 2.0, or the final major feature, was what we call dynamic contextualization. This allowed us to take inputs from one connection and use it as an input to a query for another connection. So for instance, if you're producing a batch on the factory floor, you can pull the PLC and get the batch number and then use that batch number in the query to the MES system to pull out what's the recipe or what's all of the alerts that have been logged for this batch. So you can do that dynamic pulling of information from SQL and REST connections, utilizing inputs from things like OPC, other SQL connections, MQTT, or REST. So lots of great functionality here. I'm going to launch one more poll question, then we're going to turn this over to Aron to do the demo. Let's see if I can find those polls.
Awesome.
Let me just launch this, Aron, and we'll turn it right over to you.
Perfect. And can you, it looks like it's not letting me share the screen, John. Can you switch the presenter to me?
That I should be able to do. Let me stop sharing mine.
The poll question is the screen while we iron out the technical difficulties.
That's it.
On my side, it just says host disabled, participant sharing.
All panelists. All right. You should be all set.
We're good.
And let me end the poll.
It worked.
Awesome.
Perfect. All right, let me know when you can see my screen.
I can see your screen now.
Okay.
Oh, now I can see your Outlook.
Yeah, you can see my calendar. Perfect. Should probably close that out. Anyway, all right. So yeah, so what I'm going to show today is a few things. I'm going to show the centralized configuration that John was talking about, and I'm going to do it kind of bare bones. So I'm kind of show you how to start it up from scratch, or pretty close to. So a lot of our customers, our most successful customers on their Industry 4.0 transformation, what we're seeing is they've kind of put in the layer of connectivity in the factory, meaning they connect to machines, they got some data in SQL in different places. So they've got kind of the connectivity figured out, or they're figuring that out. And now they're on to what I would call like rapid application enablement, right? And what they're using HighByte for is, specific applications, whether that's OEE, energy monitoring, asset monitoring, you name it. They build data models around those applications, test it out in a single site, and then they say, okay, we figured this out here. Now we want to take this OEE application and scale it across sites. How do we do that, and how does HighByte help us? So a lot of these features in the initial 2.0 release, which we're really excited about, are a start to the infrastructure to help customers do that, to scale these applications, the data ops part of that application quickly across sites. So I have the standard install that you can grab off the website for 2.0. So I'm just going to go in here, and the first thing I'm going to do is just launch it. And this has a little bit of configuration, but it's pretty bare bones. So while that's running, I'm just going to jump over here. And one of the big changes in 2.0 as well is you don't need Tomcat or IIS to host the config. So you can just launch the runtime, go to localhost 45245, and bam, it's up and running. You can still use Tomcat, IIS, or your own web server, but you don't necessarily need it. So it's simplified. And I'm going to log in. I have some configuration here. It looks familiar to 1.4, right? Not a huge UI change. I've got an OPC UA connection here where I can, browse inputs just like before, bring in tags. Let me close. I can see John still. There you go. I can read those tag values, etc. And then I can also jump out. We have the SQL connector. So a lot of the stuff is the same, right? There's no breaking changes. Your projects will port over. So you can view tables in SQL, execute queries to get data. A few other things you'll notice in the menu is we now have the logs in here. So you can hit the logs. You don't have to go out and monitor the console or anything else. You can view those logs here. They're searchable, so you can view by type, source, message. If I just type Aron, I think I have some logs in here, so it'll log everything with my name in it. So really easy to use, pretty cool feature. And then we have an admin tab with some capabilities that I'll get into. But the first thing we want to do is, this is going to be on my host machine, the central host, right? I'm going to kind of simulate this, but my host machine will run the central HighByte instance, and then I'm going to use Docker to connect to launch another HighByte that's going to connect in as the remote hub. And we're also seeing a lot of our more advanced customers start to use Kubernetes and Docker container technologies to be able to spin up the data ops application, spin up HighByte at the edge very quickly, and then spin that up and model and route the data back to whatever source, maybe AWS Firehose, etc. But we're seeing that technology used a lot, so I'll demo that. So the first thing we're going to do is put it in central config mode. And the way we do that currently in 2.0 is in the initial install, you'll see this default settings JSON template file. And if you open that up, those are like our application settings. These are all the default values. So I would copy that, and then you could just take the template off it, and we'll look for Intelligence Hub settings JSON. So I'm going to open that one up, copy in all the defaults, and you'll see in here under configuration, we have this central config mode. So which just defaults to false, but if I turn that on, and then what I'm going to do is, that does require currently you to restart the product. So I'm going to reboot this. And in the, in 2.1, we're already looking at exposing some of those application settings through the UI. So you'll see changes there, but right now that's the way to change them. And I'm going to refresh the page here. And what you're going to see is a few things added. I've got this host, which tells me what instance of HighByte I'm on. Host is just my desktop in this case. And that's the only one I have. And then you'll also see this network tab was added. And if I jump over here, there's nothing here, but this tells me I'm in central config mode. So in central config mode, the first thing you do is you add a group. And there isn't a lot of data right now that goes to the group. The only thing that's really there is this token, which is the security key used by remotes to connect back over WebSockets. And I'll show you where this goes. In the future, you'll see us probably expand on the groups. What we're seeing customers do is they'll create groups based on the application. Again, if it's an OE application, energy monitoring, asset monitoring, whatever that application is, they'll create groups around that is one thing we're seeing, or groups around sites. So you'll see additional metadata to do things like synchronize projects with a group, et cetera. But right now it's pretty simple. So I've got that up. Now what I'm going to do is go stand up my other instance, my remote hub. And what I have on my machine is I have Docker Desktop installed, which if you haven't seen, looks like this on Windows. I currently don't have any HighByte instances running. So what I did is I grabbed the Docker install, which is in here. This is, again, you get direct off the website. And what I'm going to do is just run two really simple commands. First, I'm going to just cd to that directory. And the commands are first to load it into my Docker environment, which here's the command here. It's just a Docker load command. I'm going to run that. So that's going to take the tar file, kind of unpackage that, create a Docker image based on that. And you can see the image was loaded. And the last thing I'm going to do is run that image. And again, this is just the port that we expose. In this case, I am going to change the port on my host to 45246, because remember, I'm hosting HighByte on my host, which is using that 45245 port already. So I'm just going to move that over so there's not a port conflict. And then I'm going to run it. And what we'll see here is it, same event log console that we'd see before. It starts up and running. If I jump into Docker Desktop, I'm going to see it running here. There's two edits I do want to make here. The first one is, so I'm just launching, I have a command prompt into that Docker instance, is what you're seeing here. The first one is, this is kind of our root directory. We have configuration and runtime. This is the same you'd see on Windows. So I'm going to go into the configuration directory, and I'm going to go into config, and I'm going to edit this settings JSON file. And it looks like we got some Windows stuff in here. I think the files are generated on Windows, so we'll remove that. I'm going to test my Vim skills. And we're going to change that. Remember, we changed this port to 45246. And what this file is when the runtime serves up the configuration, it serves it up as JavaScript. This file goes with it, and this file tells the browser where to point to connect to HighByte, the HighByte REST API. So if I left it at 45245, the browser would get the config and then connect to my central host, which is not what I want. So I'm going to change it to 45246. And then I'm just going to exit out and restart. And what this will do is, now I can pull up another window at 45246. And once this gets up and running, give it a quick second. Now this is connected to my Docker image, right? Which there is no configuration. So I have independent windows for the central host. In this case, from my central host, I can connect down to Docker. That may not be the case, in an enterprise scale application, but just so you can see, I'm connected directly to Docker. But now I want to enable the centralized config mode, right? So I want to add that hub into this group. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this token. I'm going to go back into Docker and open up the command line, and it opens up into the runtime directory. And what I'm interested in is this Intelligence Hub remote config JSON template. Now, again, template is just, we create those. They're not used by the runtime. They're just to show you the default settings. So the first thing I'm going to do is not by, I'm going to move that over to just take the template off it, because I actually want to use it. And then I'm going to open it up, and it's got the Windows stuff in there too. Let me remove that. So I'm basically just going to add that token in to here. There we go. And then the other thing I'm going to do is, since this is Docker, I have a Docker image connecting to my host. You have to use a special host.docker.internal address to resolve that. So I'm just going to change that. And it's going to connect back to that same port the central host is using for the web server, 45245 on WebSockets. Oh no. I'm going to jump back in. Here we go. Host.docker.internal. All right, that looks right. All right, so then we'll exit and then we'll restart this again. So now it's going to find that remote config file, pull the URL and the token from that and then go and connect back. So we're just going to monitor the event log on this and we'll see once it starts to spin up. There it goes, version 2.0. We'll see remote configuration failed to connect. Let's see. Oh, looks like I spelled internal wrong. That'll do it every time, huh? All right, let's go back in. You can rehearse as much as you want, but the typos will get you every time. Internal, all right. And we'll reboot. So once we get the address right, you'll see that's the connection failure, but what it's trying to do is connect back to the central host, and then it uses that token to authenticate with the group. So we'll reboot that. And then once that comes up, there we go, here it comes, starting the configuration. Yes, we worked. All right, so it says we connected. So now if we jump back and look at the network tab, we see this in the group hubs, there's this hub named really weird, and that's because we use the host name to come to identify ourselves. In Docker, the host name is just some random numbers. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just jump in and just call this something a little more readable, my Docker image. And now we've got it, so now we've got that connected in our group. So what does that mean? It means that we've connected over WebSockets, right? And now that we're in, when I click this, I can now select the Docker image, hit update, and now I'm connected through proxy, down to this remote site, in this case Docker, looking directly at the configuration. I can make any edit I want as if I were on site, directly accessing the web server on the Docker image. So here's the direct, oops, looks like I need to refresh that. Here's the direct access that I have. This is equivalent to what I'm doing here, what I'm proxying through. So if I go in and add a connection, that connection would be added in the Docker image and up and running. So that's pretty cool, right? That allows you to remotely configure anything that's connected to this, which is pretty awesome. Now, we added a few other capabilities in 2.0 that I'll show you. So if you jump to the network tab, we have the ability to compare projects between any two instances. And in this case, it's the source instance and the target, right? And the target is my Docker image. Now I could have another Docker image set up and I could compare the projects between those two Docker images. In this case, I'm just going to do it between my source, which is my host, and my target, but you kind of understand I can compare anything that's kind of connected into the host. So I'm going to do a compare and it's going to come back and tell me everything's different because there's nothing on the Docker image, right? It's an empty project. So if I jump to sync, what I can do is I can take my entire project as it is on the host and I can say, go sync that with a Docker image. And once I do that, if I jump back to compare, oops, you'll see no differences, right? Everything's the same. So I'm just gonna refresh the page here locally, and you'll see that now on the Docker image, all the connections, all the models, all the instances and flows automatically got synchronized down with that version. So I've kind of initialized it and set it up. And then if I jump here, and jump around, now I'm directly configuring the Docker image. Again, I can see all the connections on all the flows. I could go down and do read operations, which I believe this will fail, as it should. Yep. So for an example, because I'd have to change this to that same weird address, host.docker.internal, save that, assuming I spelled internal right. Do the read and now it works, right? So it's connecting back to my OPC server running on my host. But now that I've made that change locally, right, I could go back to the network tab and do a compare. And what we'll see is it'll identify that change that I just made, right? So the OPC connection has changed. And if we went down, that local host got converted. As another example, I could jump into the remote or someone locally could jump on the instance and go start messing around with my models, which could be kind of bad, right? But I could change states, I could add a new attribute, and I'm doing all this on the Docker image. Save that, and then if I jump back to the host, do a compare, It's going to pick up those model changes as well and tell me that, oh, looks like a new attribute's on the target that's not on the host. Looks like a change was made to the state variable, et cetera. So if I don't like that, I can be like, hey, you know, local controls engineer that messed with my model, I'm going to go and sync it back. And now if I jumped again back to the Docker image, that synchronization will overwrite any local changes that were made. So now I have some enforcement of my model to prevent changes. So this is kind of the basics, right? The ability to connect in hubs, be able to configure those as if you were locally connected, and then also do synchronization and compare. And you'll see us expand on the feature set. This is just kind of the initial 2.0 release. As an example, you can sync the entire project, but if you turn that off, you can sync connections or models. So you can pick specific objects if you choose. So let me jump back to my host, and I'll show you a few more features there that we added in 2.0 that could prevent that that local controls engineer from messing with your data model, as one example. But I did see something. Let me just turn that off, because that's not an array. All right, so another thing we added in 2.0, John had mentioned, were users and roles, right? So the ability to restrict, have multiple users and then restrict what they can do. So it looks like in my rehearsal, I already set him up. So I'm going to delete him. But by default, we have an administrator user, right? He has an admin role and then claims. And if you looked at roles are nothing more than a collection of claims. So it's a way to just kind of abstract and put a bunch of claims together, but you can also put claims directly on users. So if I looked at my admin, he has a claim that's just an asterisk, which means he can do anything. This is kind of like the AWS syntax for restricting users. If I look at the default user, the way claims are specified, there's a helper here, but it's also in the user guide, is it's the object and then the action. And the actions are CRUD. So they're create, create, read, update, delete actions. So and then the asterisk just means everything. So in here, the default user can read any object. For instances specifically, he can do anything. For connections, they can do anything. For flows, they can do anything, but what you don't see is models. So if the default user, tried to edit a model, that wouldn't work. So I'll just demo this real quick by creating a user for myself. Super secret password. I won't set a role, but I'll do something like, I'm just basically a read-only user. So I have access to read any object. And then if I log out and I log back in as Aron, and I went into that model and tried to make a change, like we did before, hit save, what you'll see is user does not have the rights to access this resource. So although I can read it, I'm not allowed to change it in any way. So that's pretty cool. And the other thing we have, as John had mentioned, was auditing. So to enable that, again, if you went into the settings JSON, and this is a feature we'll probably expose through the UI in the next release or soon after. But if we go in here, there's also under log, there's a log audit events, which is false. But if I turn this to true, and then once again, I'm just going to restart the runtime for that to take effect. When we add it to the UI, it wouldn't require a runtime restart, but currently does. So, well, that's spinning up. Now, any change I make that modifies the project, so add connections, edit connections, delete a connection, will result in an audit log. So let me show you what that looks like. So in the log, we have new events called audit. You can see the user administrator logged in. There's an audit event on that. If I went into my connection, like Firehose, for example, and just added a description and went to the log event, you would see user administrator updated Firehose, description was changed from null or nothing to that value. If I go into a model and modify, that attribute we were saying before, again, and then in the next version 2.1, we'll make this a little less verbose. In this case, we dump, all the attributes before and then all the attributes after. So you could look through here and see what changed. In a future release, you'll see us kind of condense this, but we're trying to include as much information as we can so you can track what changed in the project. So this is part of becoming CFR 2111 compliant. We're not fully there yet, but this is one of the big steps in logging audit events and tracking the users that are making changes in the system. So let me, want to go back and fix my model. There we go. All right, so the last thing I wanted to show, potentially last thing is the Firehose stuff. So we added a Firehose connection in this version for data streams and Firehose. I'm just going to show Firehose because it's easiest to demo the data coming through. Although it's not the sexiest demo, you'll be able to see it. So when you create a Firehose connection, you just need an IAM account that has access to Firehose or data streams inputs. So I've already done that. And then you just specify the region. And then in outputs, you just specify the delivery stream. So let me, 1 second, the panel gets in the way. I just want to jump to AWS, there we go. So inside of AWS, I'm just going to jump to Kinesis. And I have an existing Firehose connection. We could create a new one, but it's pretty basic. I have all the defaults. And what this is doing is it's just going to write to S3. And the only thing I changed from the defaults is the queue size I set to 1 meg, and then the flush rate is 60 seconds, so it puts data a little faster. And then inside of HighByte, all you need to do is reference that delivery stream name, right? And in there, so now I've got a flow. I'm going to take the compressor model. I'm going to output it to a REST webhook so you can kind of see what the data looks like. And then I'm also going to output it to, oops, got to select output, Firehose. Save that, just turn the flow on. And now we can jump to logs to see if there's any errors. Doesn't look like there are, so I think we're good there. And I just need to jump back to AWS. So now it's pushing up to our Firehose, and then it's dumping to S3 is kind of the flow that I've set up. So if I jump into S3, we might not see it immediately because it has a 60-second flush, but pretty soon we'll see the data hit here, and then I'll be able to open up and show you. We also support data stream, which is a little different. You can control sharding, but really what you're seeing us do is add AWS connectivity depending on the endpoints you want to push to in AWS, because there's multiple ways to ingest data. Those ways have different cost depending on what you're trying to do. So this is just another way to ingest mass data, potentially at a lower cost, into the AWS environment. And that might, like I said, that'll take at least a minute to queue up. While that's going, I do have the webhook site going where you can see we're posting the data. This is just OPC UA data that I've modeled on that compressor model. So that's kind of the JSON format. That's the same thing that's being pushed to AWS Kinesis. And let's see, there it is. All right, so it's just being pushed into a bucket that's specified by date time. And when we get down to the actual data, I'm going to open that up. And what you'll see, this is what I mean. It's not like the coolest demo, but if I open up this file in S3 format, you'll see that same JSON model is being put line by line into the file. And we're not, you can do a lot in Firehose to transform the data on the fly and do some other cool stuff, but we're not leveraging any of that. Or in the demo, I haven't set that up in AWS. So I think I'll pause there. I was going to show off some dynamic visualization, but I think we might be running tight on time. There's a lot to show in 2.0. So I think we want to leave some time for questions.
Thanks, Aron. That was awesome. Let me jump back with, we'll do one more poll. Let's do this one. How many hubs are people thinking about using? So, you know, a lot of times it comes up, people are thinking about, you know, we need multiple hubs. We just talked about all these different ways of manipulating the hubs, but now that you've seen this, we'd be interested in, are people thinking that they're going to be using multiple hubs in their environments? So give people a couple seconds on that, and then we'll jump back into the presentation and finish off with questions. All right, I'm going to end the poll. Thank you all for joining, those who have. I'll share the results real quick. It does look like there's quite a range of who, you know, how many hubs people think that they're going to run, so that's great. And hopefully as you start using the Intelligence Hub, in version 2.0, you'll see how convenient we made that and the ability to be able to manage that. So let me stop that. Let me share my screen. And now, one last thing that I did want to show, we've been working with AWS and working with the team there to educate them on HighByte and how it fits into their environment. So actually the AWS team put together this diagram, which highlights a number of areas where the HighByte Intelligence Hub can connect in with the AWS cloud via various services. So these are all things that we just wanted to highlight here. We've got IoT Greengrass and IoT Core. We use our MQTT connector for those, and we've had that connection for a while now. We added an IoT Sitewise a few releases ago, and then the big change in this release is adding the Kinesis data firehose. So that's the big enhancement, but we just wanted to highlight the different services that you have within AWS and how we can connect in with many of them. As Aron said, a lot of it depends on what you're trying to do with AWS and what's most cost effective and most efficient for you. With that, I think I've covered all the material that I wanted to cover. Aron, you've covered the material you wanted to cover as far as I know. So we just want to thank everyone for joining us, and I guess we'll turn it over to Tori. Are there any questions that people have added?
Yeah, I've gotten one question in the chat. Wanted to know if we offer a free trial. If so, can you talk a little bit about that in the process?
We definitely offer a free trial. Happy to sign you up. As you can see on the page today, that if you just reach out to us, you can either sign up through the try and buy, and then and we can get you hooked up, or you can just reach out to one of us, and we can we do sign you up with a specific, your email address gets access to a special page on our website where you can download it, and that is a 30-day trial.
Great. I have another question, John, about for you and Aron about benchmarking. So this question says, I wonder if you have benchmarks on how many tags can you consume per instance? Any idea if instead of having single instances is in the roadmap, having a cluster, a configuration is done to a cluster and data is balanced? Aron, maybe you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, so we have some rough benchmarks that we can provide, but we actually currently have an Epic, we use Agile, but an Epic to go off and build a benchmark machine to basically have a one pager on like, this is the performance you can expect. It'll be pretty high, right? In terms of the question of, single instance and clustering, I don't necessarily see us doing any kind of like horizontal scaling automatically like you'd see in cloud ingestion. I just don't think data on the factory comes in. I mean, we can get a lot of data, right? But not at the rate that you need that kind of technology and the complexity of it. That said, would there be instances where a customer might want to spread out a load across instances? Potentially. So we want to provide a little more guidance to customers on that. So we're doing the legwork to benchmark performance a little more rigorously because we get that question quite a bit.
I'd say the final question here, and then we'll let everyone go. Will this recording be made available? Yes, I can answer that one. We will send out the recording by email as well as some additional resources by tomorrow. So look for that in your inbox and you'll be able to view that on YouTube.
And with that, I think we're wrapping up. So want to thank everyone for joining and look forward to continuing the conversation. Like I said, reach out to us and we'd love to talk to you more about the HighByte Intelligence Hub.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Cheers.